The conference room laughter lasted approximately 7 seconds. Reginald Marston, founder and chief executive of Marston Beverage Group, had started it, and the 7 senior vice presidents seated around the table had joined in with the careful enthusiasm of executives who had learned over the years that Reginald enjoyed an audience for his jokes. The joke, in this case, was the 22-year-old black summer intern who had just finished her 10-minute presentation at the head of the room. Her name was Tobaloba Adeyemi. She had been at Marston Beverage Group for 6 weeks. She had been invited to the executive innovation meeting by the head of new product development, a careful woman named Dana Phillips, who had been mentoring Toby over the summer and who had told her in private the previous Friday that she thought Toby's idea was the strongest thing she had seen come out of the innovation pipeline in 3 years. Dana had asked Toby if she would be willing to present it to the executive team. Toby had said yes. She had spent the weekend preparing her slides. She had spent Monday rehearsing with her roommate, an industrial design student named Priya, who had told her that her delivery was clear and that her data was good. She had walked into the executive conference room on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. wearing the navy suit her mother had bought her for college interviews, holding a USB drive in one hand and a small bottle of water in the other, with the careful, nervous focus of a college senior who had been told her idea was good enough to present to billionaires. She had presented for 10 minutes. She had answered 3 questions clearly. She had finished by saying simply that she believed the technology could be developed into a commercial product within 18 months at a manufacturing cost of approximately 42 cents per unit, with a projected gross margin north of 70%. She had thanked the room. She had sat down. Reginald Marston had looked at her over the top of his reading glasses for one long, considering moment. Then he had laughed. He had said, in the rolling baritone he used when he wanted the room to know that he was about to say something he himself found extremely amusing, "Sweetheart, that is genuinely one of the most adorable presentations I've ever sat through. I mean that. You are very clearly a bright young lady with a future ahead of her. But what you're describing is not a product. It is a college science project. Nobody is going to drink anything that looks like that. Nobody is going to pay for anything that does what you say this does. The numbers you ran are the numbers of a person who has never sold a single bottle of anything to a single customer. I've been in this industry for 34 years. I have an excellent nose for these things, and my nose tells me very clearly that what you have presented to us this morning has 0 commercial value. 0. I want you to take that as a compliment in a sense, because it means we're being honest with you, which is more than most companies would do with an intern. Dana, thank you for indulging her. Toby, thank you for your time. We're going to move on to the next item on the agenda. The room had laughed. Dana Phillips had not laughed. Toby Adeyemi had not laughed either. She had said very quietly, "Thank you, Mr. Marston," and she had gathered her USB drive and her water bottle and her presentation folder, and she had walked out of the executive conference room, and she had closed the door behind her without slamming it, because slamming it would have given Reginald Marston the satisfaction of knowing he had reached her, and she had decided in the 4 seconds between sitting back down and standing up that Reginald Marston was not going to get that satisfaction from her. What Reginald Marston did not know, what he had no way of knowing as he moved the meeting to the next agenda item, was that the words, "0 commercial value," spoken aloud by the chief executive of Marston Beverage Group in front of 7 senior vice presidents and 1 recording secretary who took stenographic minutes of every executive meeting and filed them in a digital archive accessible to any officer of the company who knew where to look, had just done something to the legal status of Toby Adeyemi's idea that he was going to spend the rest of his professional life regretting. 6 years earlier, Toby Adeyemi had been 16 years old, sitting at the kitchen counter of her family's row house in West Philadelphia, watching her father reverse engineer a malfunctioning consumer beverage carbonator that he had bought at a yard sale for $3 and that he had decided, as a personal project, to figure out. Her father was a sanitation worker for the city of Philadelphia. Her father had been in a previous life that had ended when his student visa had expired in 1998, 2 years into a doctoral program in mechanical engineering at the University of Lagos. He had emigrated. He had not completed the degree. He had worked for the last 22 years on the back of a city sanitation truck. He had also, in the small hours of the morning before his 5:30 a.m. shift, continued to read engineering journals and to take apart malfunctioning consumer products on the kitchen counter, on the theory that the engineering education he had not been allowed to complete was a thing he was permitted to continue privately. Toby had grown up watching him. By the time she was 12, she could solder. By the time she was 14, she had built her own pH-controlled fermentation chamber out of 2 thrift store coolers and a $40 Arduino kit, on the theory that she wanted to brew kombucha that did not taste like vinegar. By the time she was 16, she had taught herself fluid dynamics from a borrowed Khan Academy course and had spent the summer between sophomore and junior year of high school sketching. In a notebook she kept on the kitchen counter beside her father's tools, the basic conceptual architecture of a beverage carbonation system that did not use compressed gas cylinders. The idea had come to her in the way ideas come to teenagers, as a question: why did every carbonated beverage in the supermarket require a multi-billion-dollar industrial gas infrastructure to exist? Why couldn't the carbonation be generated at the point of bottling from cheaper and more localized inputs? She had spent 2 years on the question, on and off, without anyone telling her it was a serious question. Her father had occasionally looked over her shoulder at her notebook and had said in his quiet way, "Interesting," and then had gone back to whatever he was working on. She had taken his interesting as encouragement. She had kept going. She had matriculated at the University of Pennsylvania the following year on a full scholarship as a chemical engineering major with a minor in materials science. She had continued to refine the carbonation concept on her own time throughout her freshman and sophomore years. By the spring of her junior year, she had a working prototype built in a corner of her dorm room using a 3D printed pressure vessel and a custom-designed nucleation cartridge, the chemistry of which she had reverse-engineered herself from publicly available patent literature on industrial fermentation processes. The prototype carbonated a 12-ounce bottle of plain water to a Brix equivalent CO2 saturation level comparable to a major commercial soft drink in approximately 43 seconds, using inputs that cost, by her calculations, approximately 14 cents per bottle. The technology had no obvious technical flaws. It also, by her review of the patent landscape, a review she had conducted in the law library of Penn's Law School during the summer between junior and senior year, working her way through the indexing of U.S. Patent and Trademark Office filings on weekends, appeared to be novel. She had filed a provisional patent application in August, on her own behalf, using a sliding scale fee structure offered by the USPTO for individual inventors with limited income. The provisional application had cost her $320. She had paid for it with money she had saved from a summer job teaching SAT prep classes. The application had been formally received and date stamped by the USPTO on August 14th of that year, which was approximately 3 weeks before she had begun her summer internship at Marston Beverage Group. The internship had been arranged by Penn's Career Services Office. Marston had a long-standing relationship with the university and routinely hired engineering interns for the summer between junior and senior year. Toby had applied for one of 3 positions. She had been hired in May. The internship had begun on June 1st. She had signed on her first day the standard intern paperwork the company's HR department provided to all summer hires, which included a confidentiality agreement and an employee handbook acknowledgement, but which, by an oversight that had been quietly persistent in Marston's HR department for the past 4 years, did not include the invention assignment agreement that the company's senior counsel had been recommending for inclusion since 2022. The senior counsel had recommended it. The HR department had not implemented the recommendation. The recommendation had been on a list of pending action items that had not been actioned. Toby had signed what she was given. She had also, on her first day, mentioned to her direct supervisor that she had a provisional patent on file with the USPTO for a beverage technology she had developed independently. The supervisor had nodded. The supervisor had not made a note of it. The conversation had taken approximately 11 seconds and had been one of approximately 140 things her supervisor had heard that morning. For the next 4 weeks, Toby had worked on the projects she had been assigned. None of the projects had involved the technology described in her provisional patent. She had worked on consumer packaging redesigns. She had worked on a market analysis of single-serve formats. She had worked on a competitive teardown of 3 new entrants in the sparkling water category. She had done the work she had been assigned well and on time, and she had kept her provisional patent entirely separate from her internship duties, on the principle that her father had once articulated to her. In his quiet way, when she had been 12 years old and had asked him whether she could use his soldering iron for a project, that what is yours, and what is theirs. And a careful person learns the difference early. In the 5th week of her internship, her mentor Dana Phillips had taken her to lunch and had asked her, in the open, curious way Dana asked questions of junior people, what she had been working on that summer outside of her assigned projects. Toby had hesitated. Then, because Dana had asked, and because Dana had been kind to her, she had told Dana about her provisional patent. Dana had listened carefully. She had asked technical questions. She had been impressed. She had told Toby very directly that what Toby was describing sounded, if the numbers Toby had run were anywhere close to accurate, like the most significant innovation in commercial beverage carbonation in approximately 40 years. She had asked Toby if she would be willing to present the concept at the executive innovation meeting the following week. She had told her that the meeting was a relatively informal forum and that the executive team frequently heard speculative pitches from across the company. Toby had thought about it for 2 days. She had spoken to her father on the phone that Sunday. Her father had said, in his quiet way, the patent is filed. Toby had said yes. Her father had said, then it is yours, and you may do what you wish with it. The meeting will not change the patent. Speak well. Trust your work. Toby had told Dana the following Monday that she would present. Dana had been pleased. Dana had also told her, in the small, careful voice Dana had been using more often in recent months, that she should not get her hopes up about the response from the executive team. Reginald Marston was 61 years old. He had founded Marston Beverage Group in 1996 with a small loan from his father-in-law. He had pivoted in 2011 into the sparkling water category, which had grown his company from a $40 million regional brand into a $1.6 billion national brand over the following decade. He had been profiled 3 years before the morning of the executive innovation meeting in a business magazine that had described him as the man who saw the bubble before the bubble. He had carried a copy of the magazine in his briefcase for 9 months. He had also, in the same decade in which his company had grown by a factor of 40, developed a particular relationship with his own success that his head of innovation had been quietly noting. Reginald had begun to believe that his judgment about products was the judgment about products, and that ideas that came to him from junior people, particularly junior people whose demographic profile differed from his own, were ideas whose value he was uniquely qualified to assess. He had said no, very loudly and over the objection of his head of new product development, to 4 innovation pitches in the previous 18 months that had each subsequently been launched, with modifications by competitors, and had become commercially significant. Dana Phillips had stopped pointing out the pattern to him after the 3rd one. She had not stopped tracking it. The presentation had been at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. The laughter had lasted 7 seconds. Toby had walked out of the conference room at 10:42 a.m. She had walked back to her cubicle on the 3rd floor. She had sat down. She had opened her email. She had drafted a single message to the head of human resources, with a copy to her direct supervisor and to Dana Phillips. The message was 4 sentences long. It said, "Thank you for the opportunity to intern at Marston Beverage Group this summer. I am writing to confirm that my last day will be Friday, 2 weeks from this Friday, which is consistent with the customary 2 weeks notice for early termination of a summer internship. I have enjoyed the work I have been assigned. I appreciate your consideration." She had sent the email at 10:47 a.m. She had then opened a separate browser tab. She had logged into her personal email account. She had drafted a different email to a Philadelphia patent attorney whose name had been given to her by a professor in Penn's engineering school 6 months earlier. The professor had recommended the attorney as someone who took on individual inventor clients on a contingency basis for matters involving commercially significant patents. Toby had not contacted the attorney before. She had decided, sitting at her desk at 10:51 a.m. that Tuesday morning, that the time had come. She had attached to the email a copy of her provisional patent application. She had written, in the body, a short explanation of her situation, that she was a college senior with a provisional patent on a beverage carbonation technology, that she had recently presented the technology to the executive team of her summer employer, that the executive team had on the record dismissed the technology as having zero commercial value, and that she was interested in exploring options for commercialization. She had sent the email at 10:58 a.m. She had received a reply at 11:23 a.m. The reply was 4 words long. It said, "Free for lunch tomorrow?" The patent attorney was a woman named Carla Vasquez. She had been practicing intellectual property law for 26 years, the last half running her own boutique practice specializing in patent monetization for individual inventors. She had built her practice on the careful, unfashionable theory that the most undervalued asset class in American capitalism was the patent held by a person who did not know what it was worth. She had met Toby at a small Lebanese restaurant on Walnut Street the following day. She had read the provisional patent application during the appetizer. She had read it again during the entree. She had asked Toby 7 technical questions, the answers to which she would later describe to a colleague as the most fluent technical interview I have ever conducted with a person under 30. She had asked Toby to describe, as precisely as Toby could remember, the words Reginald Marston had used. Toby had recited the zero commercial value sentence verbatim. Carla had asked her whether anyone else had heard the words. Toby had said 7 senior vice presidents, a recording secretary, and Dana Phillips. Carla had asked whether the meeting was minuted. Toby had said yes. Carla had nodded. She had not smiled. She had said, in the careful, unhurried voice of a woman who had been waiting 26 years to take a case of this kind, "Toby, may I have your retainer? Standard contingency. I take 25% of whatever the patent ultimately generates, after expenses. If it generates nothing, you owe me nothing." She had also pulled from her briefcase a sworn affidavit, prepared on her laptop during the cab ride, attesting to the words Reginald Marston had spoken and to the witnesses present. Toby had read the affidavit. She had signed it. Toby had completed her 2 weeks. She had done her assigned work. She had not mentioned the patent again. She had walked out of Marston Beverage Group's headquarters at 5:47 p.m. on her final Friday, with a small cardboard box of personal items and the careful, unhurried composure of a person whose plans for the next several months did not include her recent employer. Carla Vasquez had spent the following 4 months doing 2 things in parallel. The first was converting Toby's provisional patent into a full utility patent application, which she had filed in October with priority dating back to August of the previous year. The second was a discrete series of conversations with the senior leadership of 3 of Marston Beverage Group's largest competitors, all of which had been quietly tracking the sparkling water category, and all of which had attempted and failed to develop a proprietary low-cost carbonation technology of their own. The first conversation had been with the head of innovation at a global beverage conglomerate Carla had once represented in a separate matter. She had described in general terms an unencumbered patent application owned by an individual inventor for a technology that did the thing the global conglomerate had been trying to figure out for 3 years. The head of innovation had asked whether the patent was clean. Carla had said yes. She had also said that the technology had been pitched to one of the conglomerate's competitors, who had on the record described it as having zero commercial value, and that this fact would be both legally and reputationally relevant. The head of innovation had asked whether he could see the technology. Carla had said, in a controlled diligence environment, under NDA, with a 60-day exclusive negotiation window. The head of innovation had agreed. The diligence took 11 weeks. The technology worked. The conglomerate's chief technology officer reviewed the prototype and the data and the patent claims and concluded in a memo to his board that the technology was category-defining and that acquisition was both technically defensible and strategically essential. The board approved an offer of $40 million cash up front, plus performance-based earnouts of up to $20 million over 5 years. Carla counterproposed $50 million cash up front, plus performance-based earnouts. The conglomerate agreed. The deal closed on a Thursday in April of the following year, 8 months after Toby had walked out of the Marston conference room. Toby was at her college graduation that same week. She walked across the stage at Penn's commencement ceremony at the age of 22, with her mother and her father and her younger brother in the audience. 4 days after the wire transfer of $37.5 million, $50 million less Carla's 25%, had hit a trust account Carla had set up in Toby's name. Toby had not told her parents about the money yet. She did not tell them until the following Sunday at brunch, when she handed her father an envelope containing the title "Transfer for a New House in the Neighborhood Her Mother Had Wanted to Move to for 15 years, and a notarized letter retiring him, with full pension equivalent from the Philadelphia Sanitation Department. Her father had read the letter twice. He had set it down. He had not been able to speak for approximately 90 seconds. Her mother had cried. Her brother, who was 14, had said, "Holy shit, Toby." Their mother had told him to watch his mouth. Then their mother had said it herself very quietly into her coffee cup. The four of them had laughed for the first time in a long time. Reginald Marston had learned of the deal 11 days after it closed, when Beverage Industry Weekly had published a short article describing the conglomerate's acquisition of a patent for a novel low-cost carbonation system developed by an independent inventor. The article had not named the inventor. Reginald had not connected the article to the intern from the previous summer. The connection had been made for him 4 days later, when Marston Beverage Group's general counsel had walked into his office, closed the door, and laid on his desk a copy of the Executive Innovation meeting minutes from the previous summer. With the words, "Zero commercial value" highlighted in yellow, the general counsel had asked Reginald whether he remembered the meeting. Reginald had remembered the meeting. The general counsel had asked Reginald whether he understood what he was looking at. Reginald had understood. The general counsel had spent the next 40 minutes explaining, in the careful, unhurried voice of a lawyer who had spent the previous 3 days reviewing every document the company had on Toby Adeyemi, exactly why Marston Beverage Group had no enforceable claim to the patent, no plausible cause of action against the conglomerate, and no realistic path to anything other than absorbing the consequences of having handed an unencumbered category-defining innovation to its largest competitor on the strength of its chief executive's excellent nose. Marston Beverage Group's stock fell 11% over the following 3 trading days. The conglomerate stock rose 7%. The conglomerate launched the carbonation system as the proprietary technology behind a new product line 18 months later. The product line generated $420 million in revenue in its first year. Marston Beverage Group's board of directors met an emergency session that summer and voted 6-1 to terminate Reginald Marston's contract as chief executive. The single dissenting vote was Reginald's. He retained his named founder status and his economic interest in the company. He no longer made operational decisions. He retired to a house in Naples, Florida. He gave one interview to Beverage Industry Weekly about the events of the previous 2 years. The interview was short. He did not mention Toby by name. He blamed his head of HR. The head of HR, who had been let go 6 months earlier, did not respond. Dana Phillips was promoted in the reorganization that followed Reginald's departure to Chief Innovation Officer of Marston Beverage Group. She accepted the role on the condition that the company implement a formal protocol for evaluating innovation pitches from junior staff, including mandatory documentation of any rejection on the record. The protocol was implemented. It is, by the account of the company's current chief executive, the most rigorously enforced policy in the firm. Dana sent Toby a single text message the day she was promoted. The message said, "I hope you are well. I'm sorry. I'm glad it worked out." Toby had texted back, "Thank you, Dana. You did everything you could in that room. Please take care of yourself." They had not spoken since. Toby finished her senior year of college, walked across the stage in May, and spent the summer traveling with her mother and her younger brother through Nigeria, including a visit to the village where her father had grown up and where Toby had not previously been. She paid for the trip. She also paid for a small engineering scholarship she established at the University of Lagos in her father's name, funded with an initial endowment of $2 million and structured to support, in perpetuity, the doctoral studies of Nigerian students whose work would otherwise be interrupted by financial constraint. Her father had not asked her to establish a scholarship. He had cried when she had told him. He had also, several days later, told her quietly that he was proud of her, in a sentence that contained no qualifiers, which Toby had spent the previous 22 years of her life waiting to hear, and which she had decided at 22 was going to be enough. She started graduate school the following autumn in a doctoral program in chemical engineering at MIT on a fellowship she could easily have funded herself, but had applied for anyway, because she had wanted, on principle, to compete for it. She did not work on beverage carbonation. She worked on a problem in catalytic conversion of waste polymers, which her advisor had described when she had selected the project as the most interesting unsolved problem in my field. She got up every morning at 5:30 a.m., the hour her father had gotten up for 22 years, and she sat at the small desk in her apartment in Cambridge with a cup of coffee and a notebook. and she worked on whichever piece of the problem was in front of her that morning until the sun came up.